Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper, Chapter 12. It took Barney a long time to make his way down the hill past the house. There had been no sign of Great Uncle Mary on the headland. On the road, knots of wandering people were scattered maddeningly about in his path, and 3 times he had to stand aside as a car came grinding up the steep, narrow slope. Barney dodged impatiently to and fro, in and out, with Rufus at his heels. Halfway down the hill he heard music from the other side of the harbor, and through the heads he caught sight of the dancing procession, moving forward along the quay. Slipping his finger inside Rufus's collar, he sidestepped through the thickening crowd and down the hill as fast as he could, darting through every visible gap like a shrimp in a pool. But when he reached the corner of the harbor, the procession was upon him, and he could see nothing at all but the impenetrable wall of legs and backs. He wriggled through behind them, the din of the music thumping in his ears, until he was out of the crowd at last and on the quay. With a sigh of relief he let go of Rufus's collar and ran with him toward the deserted corner where he had arranged to meet Simon and Jane. There was nobody there. Barney looked round wildly. He could see nothing to give him the slightest hint of where the others had gone. Reasoning with himself, he decided they must have caught sight of Mrs. Polk. She had been very keen on the idea of the carnival and the dancing. She must be in the procession. And it had been Simon and Jane's job to go and find her, as it had been his to go up and scout down the headland. They must have gone chasing her, knowing that he would guess where they had gone. Satisfied, Barney went off to find the carnival. He followed the last of the crowd, still drifting up the road. Even down the sheltered harbor the wind was blowing in from the sea, but now and again it dropped for a minute, and Barney heard a tantalizing snatch of the music come wafting over the roofs from somewhere in the village. Pom-pom, de-pom-pom-pom. All round him people were wandering aimlessly about, idly talking. "Where have they gone? We can meet them at the ground. But they danced through the streets for ages yet. Oh, come on." Disregarding them, Barney set off down a little side turning, with Rufus still loping patiently at his heels. He wandered from one winding lane into another, down narrow passages where slate roofs almost touched overhead, past neat front doors with their brass knockers gleaming golden in the sun, through cobbled alleys where the front doors opened not on a pavement but straight onto the street. For a small place, Trewisick seemed to be an extraordinary endless maze of winding little roads. Straining his ears all the time, Barney followed the sound of the music through the maze. He made 1 or 2 false turns, losing the sound. Then gradually the band grew louder, and with it he began to hear the hum of voices and the rasping shuffle of feet. He snapped his fingers to Rufus and broke into a trot, swinging from one quiet, deserted little alley into the next, and then suddenly the noise burst on him like a storm, and he was out in the muffling narrow street and among the crowds, out in the sunshine filling a broad road where the procession jogged and danced by. "Come on, my white-haired boy!" someone called to him, and the people nearby turned and laughed. Barney could not see Simon and Jane amongst the dancers, and there seemed little chance of being able to get to them even if he did. He gazed, fascinated, round him at the bobbing giant heads, the bodies beneath them fantastic and gay in doublets and red, yellow, blue hose. Everywhere he saw costumed figures, a man dancing stiff as a tree, a solid flapping mass of green leaves, pirates, sailors, a hussar in bright red with a tall cap, slave girls, jesters, a man in a long blue silk gown made up as a pantomime dame, a girl all in black, twirling, sinuous as a cat, with a cat's bewhiskered head, little boys in green as Robin Hood, little girls with long fair hair as Alice, highwaymen, Morrismen, flower sellers, gnomes. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. The dancers whirled in and out of the crowd on the edge of the street where he stood, and then, suddenly, before Barney knew what was happening, they were dancing round him. He felt someone catch at his hand, and he was drawn out into the center of the dancing crowd among the ribbons and feathers and bright bobbing heads, so that his feet fell into step with the rest. Breathless, grinning, he glanced up. The black-gloved hand holding one of his own belonged to the figure of the cat, twirling in the skin close black tights, with a long black tail swinging out behind, the whiskers bristling long and straight from the head mask, fitting over the cheeks. He saw the eyes glint through the slits, and the teeth flash for a moment among the dancing figures all round. He saw, close to him, in a great feathered red Indian headdress, with a face startlingly like Mrs. Polk's. But as he opened his mouth to call, the black cat seized both his hands and wheeled him round and round in a dizzy spiral through the ranks of the crowd. People glanced down at him and smiled as he passed, and Barney, giddy with the music and the speed and the twisting black limbs of the cat before his eyes, flung himself laughing round where it swung him until he came to a sudden halt against the long white robes of a figure dressed as an Arab sheik, moving with the rest so that the robes were swung wide and billowing by the breeze. And glancing up, through a world swaying with his own giddiness, Barney had time only to glimpse a slim figure with a dark-skinned, lean face, before the cat swung him by the hands, straight into the outswung, muffling folds of the man's white robes. The robe twisted round him as he staggered, still laughing, in the sudden gloom, and then, so quickly that he had no time even to feel alarmed, the man's arms came round him like an iron band and lifted him from the ground, and the other hand muffled his mouth in the folds of the cloth, and Barney felt himself being carried away. Before he could struggle, he was swung in a scuffling moment through the roaring music of the crowd, pushing ineffectually against the man's chest. He felt him run a few steps and heard the noise of the voices and the band suddenly grow fainter. He kicked out blindly and felt his toes hit the man's shins. But he was only wearing sandals and could do no great harm. The man gave a muffled curse but did not pause, jolting him along for a few more steps, until Barney felt himself swung higher into the air and dropped on a padded seat that protested with the noise of springs. The robe fell loose from his mouth. He yelled and went on yelling until a hand came back and pressed hard against his face. A girl's voice said urgently, "Quickly, get him away!" A voice almost as light as a girl's, but masculine, said curtly, "Get in, you'll have to drive." Barney suddenly lay quite still, all his senses alerted. There was something familiar about the second voice. He felt coldness at the back of his neck, then pressure of the hand over his mouth relaxed a little through the cotton folds, and the voice said softly close to his ear, "Don't make a noise, Barnabas, and don't move, and nobody will be hurt." And suddenly Barney knew the black-masked figure of the cat and the dark man's chic robes. He felt the seat shudder slightly as the noise of the powerful car's engine coughed and then rose in a throbbing howl. Then the note deepened, and he felt a lurch and knew that he was being driven away. Rufus jumped nervously back from the shifting, dancing feet that had enclosed Barney in the crowd. Tentatively, he put his nose forward to follow once, twice, but always a heel came in the way with an accidental kick, and he had to dodge away. From a safer distance, he barked loudly, but the sound was lost at once in the booming music and the clamor of the crowd. Alarmed by the shattering noise and bustle suddenly filling his small world, he put his ears back flat against the side of his head. His tail was down between his legs, and he showed the whites of his eyes. He retreated further from the noise, waiting hopefully on the corner of the street for Barney to reappear, but there was no sign of him. Rufus moved uneasily. Then, as the band drew directly opposite, blowing and banging only a few yards away, rocking every corner with the rise and fall of music, and to a dog's ears it was a menacing roaring noise, Rufus could suddenly stand it no longer. He gave up all hope of Barney, and turning his back to the clamor of the carnival, he padded away down the alley with the tip of his tail sweeping the ground and his nose lowered, sniffing his way home. Simon and Jane rejoined one another at the corner of the harbor, quiet again now in the sunny afternoon. "Well, I've been back to where we said. He isn't there. I've had a good look at the house. He hasn't been there either. Do you think he could have gone off after Mrs. Polk?" "I keep telling you, it couldn't have been Mrs. Polk. You saw." "I don't see why not. If only you hadn't stopped me, I could have grabbed her." "How could we meet Barney here if you—" Simon began. "Oh, all right. But we haven't met him." "Well, then, he can't have come down from the headland yet. Jane's expression changed. "Oh dear, perhaps he got into trouble up there." No, don't worry when you don't need to. More likely he's found Great Uncle Mary after all, and they're both up there still. Well, come on then, let's go and look. The car swayed and growled as if it were alive. Barney lay wrapped up like a parcel in robes, which Mr. Withers had slipped from his own shoulders as he dropped him in the car. He decided that it must be a sheet. The smell of it under his nose was like clean laundry on the beds at home, but he wasn't at home. He muttered peevishly under his breath and kicked at the side of the car. Now, said Mr. Withers. He took hold of Barney's legs and swung him none too gently round into a sitting position, at the same time pulling the sheet clear of his face. "I think, perhaps, we might let you emerge now, Barnabas." Barney blinked, dazzled by the sudden sunlight. Before he could open his eyes properly to look at the road, the car swung, squealing through a gap in a high wall, and slowed down, its wheels crunching on gravel along a tree-lined drive. "Nearly there," Mr. Withers said placidly. Barney twisted his head to glare up at him. He could still barely recognize Mr. Withers' face through the dark brown stain that turned him into an Arab. The eyes and teeth glittered unnaturally white, and behind the makeup the man seemed withdrawn and pleased with himself, almost arrogant. Where are we? Where are you taking me? Don't you know? Oh, no. The dark head bobbed wisely. Of course you would not. Well, you will know soon, Barnabas. What do you want? Barney demanded. Want? Nothing, my dear boy. We're taking you for a little ride to meet a friend of ours. I think you'll get on very well together. Barney saw through the trees that they were coming to a house. He looked down the street, still twined round him, and wriggled to move his arms free. Mr. Withers turned quickly. Take this stupid thing off me. I feel silly. Just a little joke of ours, Mr. Withers said. Where's your sense of humor, Barnabas? I thought you were enjoying yourself. He leaned over and began pulling the sheet free as the car drew up alongside the peeling front door of a big, deserted-looking house. You'll have to hop out if you can. I can't loosen it properly in here. He spoke casually, easily, with no trace of menace in his voice, and as Barney glanced up at him suspiciously, the white teeth shone briefly again in a smile. The girl slipped out of the driving seat, moving like a snake in her black tights, and came round to open the door at Barney's side. She helped him out and spun him round to pull the sheet away. Barney staggered, his arms and legs so stiff with cramp that he could hardly move. Polly Withers laughed. Her head was still a fantastic sight in the close-fitting black cat's mask covering her face, but the eyes and mouth. I'm sorry, Barney, she said companionably. We overdid it a bit, didn't we? You danced jolly well, I thought. I was almost sorry to stop. Still, never mind now. We'll go and have some tea, if it isn't too early for you. I haven't had any lunch, Barney said irritably. Barney said irrelevantly, suddenly remembering. Well, in that case, we must certainly get you something to eat. Good gracious, no lunch. And it's all our fault, I expect. Norman, ring the bell. We must feed the poor boy. Mr. Withers, making a concerned clicking noise with his tongue, crossed from the car and pressed the bell next to the big door. He was all in white still, but in shirt sleeves and white flannels without his Arab robe. His bare arms were stained the same dark brown as his face. Barney, following him slowly, with the girl's hand resting lightly on his shoulder, was puzzled by their friendliness. He began to wonder whether he had been seeing everything in the wrong light. Perhaps this was, after all, only a joke, part of the fun of Carnival Day. Perhaps the Witherses were perfectly ordinary people after all. They had never actually done anything to prove beyond doubt that they were the enemy. Perhaps he and Simon and Jane had got things wrong. Then he heard footsteps echoing faintly within the house, clumping gradually nearer, and the door was opened. At first he did not recognize the figure in tight black jeans and green shirt. Then he saw it was the boy Bill Hoover who had chased Simon for the map, and in a moment he remembered the scene on Kamar Head that day and the greed on Miss Withers' face when she had looked at the map, and he knew that they had not been wrong after all. And there we will pause.